All right. So this is scene 7, take 3. This is the second day, the third session of the Bootstrap seminar, and the next thing we're going to do is have Margaret Chambers lead a little bit of discussion. Take it away, Margaret.
Thank you. We're going to take a few minutes to share some of our insights and questions that are coming up in our minds as a result of the first day and a half before we go on in the afternoon. And I'm first going to ask Joel if he will share some things with us.
What came up over our lunch table was
Could you try a different microphone, please?
Hello? Yes. Okay, we're on. Over lunch, somebody brought up Xanadu, which is a hypertext system that some have called the world's oldest piece of vaporware, since Ted Nelson has been talking about it for 20 years. But and how does Xanadu relate to Augment? And Xanadu is the company that is making Xanadu got bought by Autodesk about 4 years ago, and it is quite close to being a product. Ted is not managing that process. There are real managers in there and real programmers, and the major conceptual difficulties have been solved. But what Xanadu is a very, very general hypertext engine. Hypertext is defined by Ted as nonlinear text, text being defined very generally to include all the kinds of media that you think of. And the distinguishing characteristics of Xanadu versus other hypertext systems are that it's designed to handle very, very large quantities of data, number one. Number two, that it's designed to be locally efficient in spite of handling very, very large quantities of data. Number three, it's got a royalty tracking system, since when Ted thought of the system, he was a socialist, like many people are when they're 25, and by the time it got implemented, he was no longer a socialist, like happens to most people after they're 25. And so there's a way of keeping track of the money, and the big problems have been solved. There are now just performance issues that are being ironed out, and one of the beta test sites is the Bibliothèque Nationale. Now, what does that have to do with Augment? The answer is that Augment is, from the Xanadu point of view, Augment would be a front end. Xanadu is a back end. It's an engine for which there will be many front ends. For example, Autodesk will be manufacturing or producing one front end called Montage, which is a relatively simple document management, hyper document management system. And these things ought to be commercially available in about a year. Doug believes, and I concur wholeheartedly, and I'm trying to do something about it, that Autodesk, because of its association with Xanadu, would be a good place to try out the concepts that you're hearing about at this seminar. I also heard in different conversations over lunch people trying to take issue with what we've seen so far of Augment, and to say, well, I can do that in my word processor. And I think that what is not evident from some of the demonstrations is that this is occurring in the context of a universe of documents, or what Ted Nelson would call a docuverse, an entire network-based framework that can be physically distributed over large areas. And so the fact of grabbing something and moving it from one place to another and referring to something else, these are things that in the context of just moving pieces of text around look like simple word processing activities, but in fact have much larger data manipulation implications that are not immediately evident, especially when you get into other media. And it occurred to me that in Doug's language of the ABC way of looking at things, and on beyond zebra as well, but C suffices, the that what we're seeing, in a sense, and this is what I heard some resistance to, is a particular A. That is a particular way of a cording keyboard and a mouse, and a particular way of interacting with things that may not be everybody's A. That is, it may be a B for some people, in the sense that you may do other things with this system, or it may simply be a meme, that is a conceptual gene to be passed along, and that would manifest as part of another conceptual organism. But that does not, you shouldn't, I would encourage you not to throw out the underlying concepts of Augment and the Bootstrap concepts just because you don't like those particular ways of doing things. The notion of learning a vocabulary of operations, for example, and to take these as examples of what could be done.
Nikki, would you like to share one of your insights that you shared over lunch? One of your many?
I don't know if I really had any particular insights, but I did mention that I was really struck by the insight that I think I got on the fact that the documents and language as we use them today have actually been constraining the way we think and our creativity, and that if we can use these concepts and tools to somehow represent what goes on in 99% of our brains most of the time that we never convey or communicate to each other, perhaps it's not just the external tools that will evolve, but also the way we think and the amount of creativity that we can bring to bear on the world. So to me, that's been kind of a stunning notion this morning.
How about some of the rest of you? Have you something you'd like to share at this point? Yes.
Well, even very brilliant people tend to have a lot of misses and a few good hits. And it seems that from the discussion of this morning, all the ideas that Doug has come up with are finding slowly their way into the computer that we know today. And I mean, have you done anything wrong? Any idea that has not been
Nothing to speak of.
He'll stay silent on that one. Ezra?
That'd be interesting to go look.
Right. Maybe you'll have to grab an inspired microphone right now.
Yeah, this is where everyone's gathering. I guess one of my, it's not a concern, but an interest is the whole issue of interoperability and to what extent you take that. I'm currently in an organization of about 2,500 people that is being controlled in a Stalinist way when it comes to operating systems and software and stuff like that. And I would like to suggest that that can really limit the potential and creativity of the users. On the other hand, you do need a certain amount of standardization in order to be able to do some of the things that we're talking about, and I would just like to raise as an issue that trade-off.
Good. We ought to make note of that because that's worthy of some discussion later on.
A big item. The many really tough problems and options, and many of them are going to take more than one organization to try to pull together enough experience in order to talk. There's a list of things like that, sort of, say, the C kind of community, really purposeful one, is really called for.
I think we're ready to move on then. Thanks.
Very good. Okay, I guess we're ready to switch to computer video, and we'll start employing the kind of things that we looked at before. And what would you do with them? So there's a file here that we're looking at in the conventional way we approach it. Look at the top level. And one of the things is I was just going to show you the master roster to show you a little bit about some of the things they can do. And so I'll just say jump to link, and I know behind that asterisk I folded a link, so the machine's going to go back there and boom. So off looking at the file SR8, in which we've got a roster of people here. And it's alphabetical order. And if I open up another level, you'll see that under everybody's name there's a level that's got different keywords and aspects of information we'd like to keep on it, including phone, fax, etc. So you notice that the way we organized at the top level is that everybody's last name and a comma, etc. So you say, well, if I'd like to address this and use that as a label, I can say, what's the name delimiters on there? And it says, oh, if the first word is delimited by null on the left and a comma on the right, then the computer says, I'm going to hash that and treat it as an access label. So you see the last names are all that way, right? And then you say, well, if I open up another level underneath, there I see that these we all decided to use colon. So they'd be nice to have access too. And the thing is, you'll notice that everybody's got an address underneath, ADDR or something like that. What's the name delimiter that was chosen? Oh, if you can't chew gum and walk, you should stay off the sidewalk. So anyway, so null and colon. So it's really easy. I used the sort of level clipping and filtering process. At first I said, hey, set all the levels in this whole thing with a null and a colon. And then I said, okay, set it again, but only limit to the top level as null and comma. So it just took a moment to actually establish the convention use of what's the label in there. So then we have an address function in here also that I can say, jump to an item and jump to burger. And I'll just do that, see? So it says it goes to burger, all right. Well, let's go back to where I was and say, what if I'd like to jump to burger's address? So I'll say, jump to burger, and then exclamation point, which says, now only look in the branch underneath that and find address. In the labeling and stuff, it's case independent. So that should take us to burger's address, and I open it all up, and I should go and look at it. So sure enough, see? So from any time remotely, I could set up an easy process, knows the name of this file and that structure. It'd be very easy to just go and grab burger's address out by a copy with that address into it like that. So these are just part of the sort of unfolding power that these simple conventions let you use if you employ them in various ways. Let's look at another one. We said we can sort, since all of these objects at the level we're looking at represent they're strung together, and the structures underneath them are tied together so that we can manipulate the branches by just operating on the top level, which means I can also just sort on that. So I've got that sort command you said. But what if I'd like to sort them according to the organization they came from? Well, I went for encounter. There are ways I can bring up what we call frozen screens that'll give me line count, arrangement, and everything else like that. But I already know that that's 25 characters, I think. So I'll just say, set the content. So what it does is just, this counter comes like that, and every time it looks as a candidate statement, it goes over 25 characters before it gives it to the sort command. So now if I say, it's been compiled, 25 characters, so I say, sort the plex, wait a minute. I think my key set is one of its keys is a little sticky, and So it gives me the option there to say sort on that content thing, and so watch what happens. So it'll go through and sort it. And what do you have? It's sorted by that. So it's a dumb little sort of thing, but it just falls out of how you use the sort and the content thing, etc., and how the branches are objects and sorted like that. So you say, gee, it's just very handy to arrange such things. Or if I could say something else, I could say, let me I'll undo all that and go back to which I was. And what if I say after I get out to 25 characters, I find the literal thing of ESL? Anyway, so that says go out 25 characters and find ESL. Now it might be a space ESL like that. So if I set the content of I wonder if it has anything to do with being 9 months off from the thing and also trying to talk. So if I say, all right, put on the filtering like that, and it says, it only shows me those candidate statements that met that. So if I wanted to, I could actually, I might if it gives me any more. But then I won't have the excuse anymore.
How did you decide to point with the right and key with the left?
I don't know. When I first connected these to the computers, I told the computer a way you could key in a code that says which hand you're going to use, so it would invert the two, so I could use it with either hand. And we just got used to doing that. And all the people said, well, the dexterity is different hands, so left-handed guys would like to convert it. So our most lefty guy just sat down and used it this way and never even questioned it, so we never worried much about it after that. There were a lot of things we learned in a pragmatic sense. And one of them is, one of the devices we used at the time we checked out the very first model of the mouse to sort of test them for selecting capability was a polar coordinate thing. It was a linear resistor and a rotary resistor that mounted them there, and that little stylus that you moved, it would rotate and linearly slide, so the two potentiometers would give you the polar coordinates of where you were. So I told the programmer, all right, now you have to convert that to rectangular coordinates, so we put in there and stuff, and we went ahead and did the experiments on that, and people were using it. And I went in there one day to do it, and I found out that he'd forgotten to convert it. In order to go horizontally here, you had to swing in an arc. And nobody had noticed. See? So there's some very interesting observations about what people can accommodate to. Like that. So, anyway, what I'd really like to do is take you on some tours and the linking and the conventions about it. And one of the conventions is that every augment user gives a command that says jump to the locator. And so you get the locator and it just pops you into this top level thing, and it says, okay, these are indexed online user documents, indexed the published documents, a Bootstrap BI thing, McDonnell Douglas pilot operations. So I wonder what's in there. So if I just set it like this and I say open up another level but branch only, and I look at what's there, learning how to use augment, tools and features, network access. Let's look at tools and features, see, and open up another level. So subsystems, utilities, features. Well, what are subsystems? Well, let's just look at that and open up another. So this basic hierarchy thing is just falls into place when you're starting down. You say, whatever handbooks you can have in the future, just make it very easy if they're built that way. So these are a bunch of subsystems. So what do you said? Well, what if I were interested in the mail subsystem? And so all right, this tells what it does, but you're darn sure that down in here is a link that points off to, it is. something's changed. It always had the user guide. Isn't this great? There it is. I wonder if I missed the other one because of the small window. Anyway, he says, all right, if you want to, you can go look at the programming user system like that. But for all of them, they all lead off to the online documentation. So there are just tons of it out there about how you can go use almost anything you want to and go find it, go out to the documentation, find one, find it by scanning, by content, by observation, etc. So the programmers go, and it's actually a whole language that we developed, and there are interesting things to tell you about that. But if I say jump return file, it says here's where you were, and you can actually step back through. They keep a ring of what it was, and I say I want to go back to locator, and let's go up the top level and start again. And I want to look at the Donald Douglas kind of things because there's some interesting stuff out there. And there's a program there that was an interesting one. A bunch of people were using it. So what I was hoping to find is some of the catalog information that they had. And all right, let's go look. It's got a locator. So it tells you that, oh, damn. So this is the kind of thing I hadn't had time to look, and when they restored everything, we didn't get everything in there. But and this was a big program that started to use this on a pilot basis. And where you could go from this is looking at things like the status reports anytime back. You just walk your way right to it and go click to any week's status report. And the structure of that was such, here are all the major projects under it. You could drop down and here are the things. And those status reports were collected automatically by people having a convention of in their directories having a named file of a certain name and a branch that said it's this week, and a structure underneath it. It was the current problems, that the progress report to date, etc. And you keep that up to date, and every Sunday night a very simple macro went around, gathered that, put it in the journal. So here were all these collection of things. And in each weekly report, there could be links that point to any of the others or any of the status or draft status things, you know, like what are the current requirements or specs that are doing in the journal. So you'd be pointing to those and talking about it. So you could find your way through that, and just, it's a tremendous record of the progress and the commentary and everything else of a project. And it just evolved out of this thing very, very naturally. And I'm really disappointed that it isn't there. All right, let's try something else. Here's a kind of a thing that I do all the time, is say, I've got a file name F. And what's F for? F is where I keep my file management information. So I have a link right at the top of it. So something you can do with a link, you can say jump to a link and I'll give you the address of where to find the link. So all I have to do is type it like that at any given time, and the system goes to the top of this file and executes that link, which takes it down inside to a branch in a place in which I've laid out the way I keep my file directory. So I don't keep it down at the exec level. So for at least 13 or 14 years, this is the way I've kept it. So these are just branches in an augment file with a convention that in somebody else's world you'd call them folders or directories, but it's hierarchical. So any one of these folders can have subordinate folders or files. And we see here, well, these are the names of files running down here like this. And here's another folder. And so where the update process comes along and tells me how many pages, or what version it is and how many pages. that are contained in that folder. And anytime I want to, I can take any of these and put on any notes I want to here, which always stay. So one of the things I can also do is put links in there. So one of the there are all these short things. If you can remember where Joe lived, and it's been there. So there are much ways. So I've got so I named it Programming General. So there's where all the programming stuff. So these are categories of programs and other folders down here like that. So I look at it and it says, well, the executable ones are the ones I might want to look at. So these are actually where I store actually operative programs. So it turns out the one I want is in the CA, or the Content Analyzer programs. Why do I want it? Well, I'm looking for the program that I wrote and execute when I want to update this particular kind of file directory, where I keep the files in my own environment where I'm used to, and I can rearrange them just by moving branches and statements. So I like to update that by the executive. So there's a program, and it's called PB. All right. I think it was called that. Ah. Maybe I'll take the afternoon off. There it is. There it is. The name of the file was dirkit. It's used by, it's used in a, here's the source code. And the PCS is a command sequence macro in which I use it. So I can go to either one of them and look at what's there. I can say, well, let's go look at the macro. So there's a file off where I've got that macro. And it's the macro programming language, and I can just see where it employed that program. So it puts up everything together and does a lot of manipulation and employs that program that I just looked at. Well, where's the source code of the program? Oh, it's off in this place. So I can say, okay, let's go in this window and look at the source code. So there's the way a source code directory, a program would be written. So at the first level, I got the declarations and the procedures, and I could just drop down in levels, work things very powerfully. So here's the entry level one. And one of the things I can do is look at that and say, well, let's look at it more closely. So here's, I'm calling a procedure, dpass. Let me say, just jump to name next. And that takes me to that program. So here the convention was that the label was what the compiler wants. So it says that ran it. So what if I look for procedures in here that aren't local to that? Well, I can just say, well, I'd like to jump that's the backspace isn't working. Oh, God. So I show you, okay, how you fumble around. So here, it was a macro that started with a J. J. And this one's going on. This is really embarrassing. I used to fly through all this day after day after day, and I didn't get a chance to go remember recover. Shot. I'm sort of the kind of guy that says, I'm not going to give up. So I got a feeling I just ought to give up.
Was what we just saw a second ago part of how you conceived help on this system?
No.
Was there a concept of what people now call help in this system?
Oh yeah, a whole help system that told you about the built-in commands. What I was looking for are the macros I'd written, and I'd gotten sloppy about the way I labeled them and got too many in there. And you can really set it up so you get packages of them that you don't run into that problem. And over the months I kept adding them without being more careful about just this problem. So that's a methodological issue.
Did you track at all where people needed help oftentimes on this so you had a sense of
That we were doing that in the 70s, and then I say when we get put in the commercial world, there really weren't the resources to do that. So there weren't the resources to sort of keep supporting all of this, and that those of us could, if you were sort of adventurous, you'd push off and start developing things like that for yourself, but if you didn't have a coach or somebody to help you keep your workshop clean, you'd run into these kind of problems. And it's, you know, it's very convincing for me that everybody needs a coach.
Did you have any given with coach?
Yeah. Sure. You know, at his coaching, it's sort of that's where the C is. But if you're really going to improve with really different methods and such, which you get down to this level, and he says, now come on now, you're overrunning how many things you put in there and you'll have to hold in your head. So employ these techniques for simplifying or reorganizing it, so when you have a lapse of memory, you can really go right to it. And at some point, let's build a utility that really helps in that point. So there are lots and lots of potential ways in which you can handle that, but you really need a coach. And this is the first time in all these years that I bogged down like this, and that 9 months lapse and being a little over pushed was an interesting lesson. So I have to apologize. So anyway, let's go to do something else, shall we? In the software arena, though, the provision is there. There's a central index and a particular path-following convention that's established for one of the commands, that if you see a call in any procedure in there, you can just say jump to name external, click on it, and it'll go through that index and right off, and you're looking at that actual source code of that procedure, no matter where it is, and this much shelf space of printout or something. You know, it's online, but it's a huge, huge, big program, and every procedure in there that you might bump into is one jump away like that to see its description. And then you realize that you can embed links back to the documentation about this, or links from the documentation right to any element in here, and it doesn't matter if you change it, you can link right to this file and this term here. So it provides an environment, and looking at oh God, it's you know, looking at it at a level like that for any of your procedures has led people to start making conventions about the way they structured it. Was very useful. And anyway, the whole business about structured programming just fell into place very nicely here without some of the awkwardness of some of the more conventional environments for programming. So our programmers just loved it. And they reached a point pretty soon where I'd say to them, I think we could go further with methods and conventions, and they weren't interested. And it was at that point when we started pushing for management and coordination practices and methodologies in here that went beyond what they sort of felt anyone had a right to push them, that we reached the problems that led to deciding, instead of trying to keep improving our own organization, that I was going to go to the outside organizations and work with a number of organizations who each had architects that wanted to do that, and we'd support them. And my laboratory was practically getting blown apart because I was trying organizational development activities and everything else on, and it was too precious. If it broke up, we'd lose it all. So we learned a lot about organizational development and elasticity. And so another place I want to go to is to show you about mail. So again, at the top of my mail file, which I just simply named M, there's a link which will take me to look at a branch in there that sort of shows me what the current status of mail that's been received is. See? And there are these different branches that picked up on the date that way I organize it. And underneath those branches are other branches, each of which is a mail item. And the mail item comes in, these first set of characters are an identifier for the mail that's unique for each mail item that's sent. So it's what mail group you're in, your own private in that mail group ident, that everyone has an ident that's up to 5 characters. That's Dwayne Stone. And these 5 characters here designate the time in a non-readable way. So that's a unique one. And you say, so you see that the name delimiters for these as the mail deliver them is null, null. So that what that means is that string of characters is hash coded as a label for that statement. So that means those mail items themselves are addressable uniquely any place they are in there because they have that unique name, which is very, very valuable. So how else? If you say, all right, if I want to... So this isn't like a mail system that you say, hey, just generate for me the list of headers. This is just the way you can look at something with an augment file structure, is just looking at that first level and go underneath it. And so something that Dwayne sent me the other day, that so when I look at it, I can just open up that much and, well, let's give it a little bit better sort of thing. So if he sent me something and he said, you know, way last June, I'd sent him an item about this Concurrent Engineering Research Center network, that we'd gotten an online abstract about something relative to that, and I'd forwarded it to him. So he says, did I ever follow up on it? So what he did was just give me this identifier and the date. So I fixed it up so the way all my mail is archived by month. Every month I gathered up the mail and put it in a journal. And so I maintain an index with this indirect thing like that that handles that. So I can just say, jump to name external on that, and that should follow that path and find where the collection of things was made that month, and I'll say, this is the view I... Okay, this is the way it is, and so I look down at this level and I say, oh, the message comes here. And so it wasn't formatted very well, but it was a big long message sent out with an abstract in it. It's something to be sent. So now that abstract and all of that is in a journal, and somebody can cite it like that. It should have been put in a journal as it was, but he can ask me that and I can find it because of that indexing stuff. Well, that indexing is no big deal, except it just sort of falls out very easily with the conventions for naming and structuring, jumping, viewing. So let's try a few other things too. Let's, the way I got to this file is knowing where I'd stored the link. And so let's just open up some of the examples we have here. Thinking about a little bit of intelligence collection. So, Bill Dahl, or somebody in this local group circulated an item a week or so ago, and I ingested it and put it in the journal. And it's about a conference that's coming up in June. So I'll say, let me use the window off to the right, and I'll say, I want to jump onto that journal item and look at it in this window. And there it is. It's sort of a whole outline of a speck of a conference. And something about the overview that was really very interesting to me, and it really was that if you look at it, there's some very nice statements in there that what having to do about collaboration that were very relevant to what we're doing. And
let's say you wanted to use one of those paragraphs for something.
yeah.
If you wanted to use one of those paragraphs, just display, how would you?
Or if I like to pick it up and put it in a message and send it.
Can you use the microphone, please?
The question was, how would Doug go about using one of those paragraphs that he just displayed and saying it to send it to someone else or to put it into another document?
Okay. Very easy. Very easy. What? So, the backspace which one do you want? Collaboration? How about that second one? So I say copy statement, I click on it, come over here and click on it. Because there's no such thing as cutting and pasting. We just say any entity can be copied from where we are. So then I could just really pass it up and send on it. If I want to do something else, I'd say, hey, let me sort of tell him where it was, so I could come over here and mark it and say, put a link, and there it is. That's saying if he wants to know where to get it, he can go get it himself next time. Or if I'd done that, I could have come to here and look at it and says, well, pretend like I never had it in the first place. Delete that statement. See, so I can say copy statement that you find at the end of that link and copy it to follow this one. So it goes and gets it. So once you have the link to something, you just can use it very much. Jumping. If I'd said, no, what I really wanted to get was the one before that. Oh, I made a mistake. Copy statement dot link P, which means follow the link and go to the predecessor. And would have found that. So once I get there, I can actually do all kinds of linkage, or any kind of path you want to define. So that addressing just gives you a power, and it's part of the That's different. I don't know any other system that does that. People might say they do.
How does it know that that is a statement? Well, what defines a statement?
It's actually a unique structural entity. So it's an object. The boundary between it doesn't have anything but it's just two statements, two nodes. When I type something in, I say, I want to insert a new statement. I can't say at the end of it, I want to type and put a couple of carriage returns and such. That just appends something to this statement. The only way I can get it in is to say, new statement. See? Brings it in. I'd say, oh, let me say I didn't mean it there, I meant it to go down a level. All right, it's a new statement. I can append it to this one, or I can break it into more statements. But if I say delete what's at the end of it, it doesn't think there's anything beyond the T. That's just an object all by itself. And that's what gives you the value. In the branches are an object too, made up of the hierarchy of lower order objects. So it really gives it the sorting, the manipulation, all that capability. Mark?
Doug, does that mean that the statement is defined by you?
Try it differently.
Does that mean that the statement is defined by you, or is that automatically defined in some sort of contextual way by the program?
No, the user says, I want to put in a new statement. While I'm typing it in, I want to break from here and start another statement, so it's explicit instruction to the computer about where the statement boundaries are and what's the statement object. See? And
When you selected that,
When you selected that, did you mark the beginning and end, or did you just grab something in the middle? You had already bounded that
if
previously.
I say copy statement, that noun statement added in there is all it takes for the computer to know what object class I want. So all I have to do is click unambiguously near or in it. And that, I get the whole statement. I get the whole statement.
right, but you don't know what the statement is. Only the person that inputted it knows what constitutes. They're asking what's the definition of the statement.
I guess.
Paragraph. No, it's defined by the person who inputted it. They say
He's
the beginning of the statement is the end of the statement.
Right.
And when he clicks on it, he gets that whole statement, but he doesn't know what it is.
Please use your microphone.
See, I guess I'm at a loss to say I don't know what it is. If I ended up copying a paragraph, if I had some way somebody says, copy that paragraph, and it took what was obviously a paragraph and brought it over, I don't know how to interpret. You're saying you don't know what it is. See?
Well, I thought the problem that people might be having is that when you say, I want to copy this statement, normally what a lot of us are used to is with word processors, you would define a block, or you would and say copy this block, and you click on the beginning of it and the end of it, or you say copy a sentence, or you copy a paragraph, and the software has already defined what is meant by sentence or paragraph, namely something that ends in a period or ends in a paragraph marker. But I think what you were saying is that when the person inputs something here, they say begin a statement and they type, okay, and then they say end a statement or begin a new statement or whatever. And then when somebody else who didn't create that comes along and says, I want to copy this statement, they click on that and say copy this statement, but they don't know what constitutes the beginning and end of the statement. Right? It could be 2 sentences, 3 sentences, 2 paragraphs. It depends on what the person who inputted it had defined the beginning and end of the statement to be.
So well, let's go into this a little bit. You can view this in any way you want to, among them being viewing it like it is here. You say that's a statement. Do I have any question about where it begins and ends or anything?
Yes.
So if I did this, so there's a statement that now is labeled 2B. Is there any question about it now?
No, but that was defined. That was defined by the originator, right?
The originator said, yes, I typed this in and I want it to be a statement. If I want it to be two statements, I'd break it, so it's two statements. If I want those two to be two, I would append them. So I have explicit things to manipulate the creation and the breaking up and the appending and the moving and copying of statements.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I think before, the screen that you were showing before didn't show the 2B and 2C and so forth on there. So when you look at it, you don't know that that's a single statement. But I think that delineator is in fact what identifies for you that that is one single statement. And then when you get to 2C, that's a new statement. And before that was hidden because I think you were just reading the message and not looking at the format.
That's interesting. You know, that issue has never ever come up in any discussion I've ever had before. So you're a very unusual group, or I'm doing a poor job. But you're right. We all grew up in that or lived in that so long it never occurred to us to wonder, because in all the different viewing you have, there are all sorts of ways in which you verify to yourself what constitute a particular statement of any size, like that. And a lot of times if you just say copy this thing as a statement, you click on it, come over, the only thing that comes over is that entity which is defined as a statement that you clicked on in the middle of it. And if it's too big, you say, oh, well, let's see, I didn't want all of that, or maybe I'd like to study it a little better. And I think that right about there, I'd like to break it and have the new fragment be down below it. And yes, I know because of the way I did it that that's a new statement. And some people start working all the time with those numbers on, and after a while, they do a lot more without them, just because they get in the way when you don't need them. So it's an interesting question that has always grown up to be some sort of implicit understanding about what's a statement in that. And so it's really interesting to realize, oh, when you look at it like that, very bright people say, oh, hey, how do you know that's a statement? So very good.
Well, I think there's an additional question too, which is that in a kind of hybrid document world, you would want a situation in which anybody could redefine what constitutes a statement within any given document for copying, transposing, sending purposes. Why not?
If an author authored it, he's putting these together in these clusters and like that, and he says that's a statement. I'm putting it out there. I can copy all that.
Suppose I want to quote part of his statement. Do I have to give the whole statement as he defined it?
No. You don't have to give the whole chapter. You can. The links can actually point to a particular point in any place like that. So the objective in the end is you can point to any object, and if the granularity and the nodes happens to be a paragraph-like statement or less in here, it doesn't mean that the links can't still point down inside it. You really can address any character or something in that link if you want to cite it. See? So talking about it and manipulating it, two different things. So if the guy who wrote it defined that as a conceptual entity, then you say, well, that should stay as a conceptual entity, but that doesn't mean I can't point to some sub-entity within it. So there isn't a correlation between the granularity of the nodes and the granularity of what the links can point to.
Does a reader of the document know how the originator understood his own document to be configured? In other words, do I, as a reader, say, of a document, know exactly where one statement ends and another begins in another person's document?
Well, generally speaking, do you have any trouble with paragraphs in somebody else's document?
Well, that's a visual marker. I took you to understand that a statement was a conceptual marker.
It's a map of a given conceptual bundle in his head. And if his style of writing happens to be that that's the way he packaged it, then you observe it that that's his offering as a statement or paragraph. And if you want to redo it, there are all sorts of ways you can view it in ways that modify what you're shown, but you don't go in and treat something that he created. See, you can make copies of that and do whatever you want to, and you can have views of it. So one of the views is
Doug?
Yeah?
Isn't the key to it the numbering system that you have there? For instance, the 2A and the 2B and so forth, that defines what the author identified as being a statement, right?
Well,
so the physical delineator that he's looking for is in fact those characters at the beginning of it. Is that true or not?
no, inside the file, those aren't a part of the object. They just happen to say the current location of that node in the file hierarchy. See, and they'll give the signal to you, because when you ask the computer to show it, yes, they'll be at the start of every one, or if you wish at the end of every paragraph, but that's not the defining thing. But maybe you didn't mean it that much, but that's the kind of clue you can use if you wish. But it's really very interesting that in these 23 or 4 years of active use of this kind of thing, no one's ever even brought that issue up before. How do you know?
Well, I bring it up because in some research that I've done, I tried to identify what was called a thought unit. And it's real hard. And so I see your concept of statement as being analogous to what I had in mind during this research as a thought unit. And it turns out that for a listener to identify another person's thought unit or what they had in mind as their statement, whether the statement could be a list, it could be 4 paragraphs, it could be a bunch of ums and ahs and digressions. You see where we're getting?
Yeah, but I want to take the next step. He says a reader could look at it, and when he's trying to get the comprehension that's mapped across to him from the other person, if the reader is trying to comprehend and trying to sort of match the conceptual structure that the writer had in mind, then the reader will supposed to be looking, whether consciously or unconsciously, for these thought units you're talking about, trying to isolate them and identify them. So, okay, so the reader's trying to do that, and I still don't see quite yet how that introduces something fundamental about, yeah, but what did the writer...
the question was simply both the thought unit and the statement, as I understand you to define statement, differ significantly from grammatical, conventional rules of sentence and paragraph structuring.
No, you can use it however you wish. You can make these discrete units of text, and you can have any convention you want about what I talk about it when I make these discrete units and put them in a structural relationship. And the business of actually literally being able to look at to say, how do I know which are the actual, where the boundaries are for these nodes? No one's ever even mentioned that as a problem before in working with it. But I think that's a separate one. That's how we get tangled up. Is suppose it's fairly easy. There are ways with the views where you soon learn to have, without any ambiguity, knowing where the stop and start of these nodes that the author put in there that we call a statement. No ambiguity about that. So suppose there's no ambiguity about that. Are there still questions?
I just wanted to clarify one thing. If you were working on a long document which was broken into paragraphs, each paragraph would automatically be considered. You could set it so that each one would be considered a statement.
Well, that's just the way you do it, yeah. You
Right.
break them and you deal with them like that.
Okay.
We don't use the term paragraph exactly like that, but go ahead.
Right. But if you wanted to do it that way, you could.
Sure.
How would it work on a collaborative document? Let's say that you had done a draft of a document, someone else is looking at it and wants to add in things. Could that be done in such a way that each addition is a separate statement, so that you could follow kind of what's going on in the development of the ideas?
Yeah. There's a view that shows you some of the hidden properties, and one of the properties is what was who did the last edit and when. And the one that Dave Gardner's going to show you tomorrow, they said also they're going to include in there the data about who and when the originator of that node was. But anyway, these kinds of things, when you're doing multiple work, are very interesting to show you what's inside. And this may not have been what you were. Did I miss your question?
The child in me prompts me to ask whether your command set is fault tolerant. In other words, I couldn't help but notice that as you were typing, some of the words were misspelled if I interpret them simply, like reply was R-E-P-P-L-Y. Now, is that a new word, or does the system say, I know what that means even if it's spelled wrong?
That was my own typing. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that, but if that was a command...
No, it's not a command.
Was not a command.
That's literal text. Oh, this is literal. No, the commands come out, the machine interprets what you're trying to say. Delete, phrase, for instance, and it echoes back what its interpretation is to disambiguate what you're saying, to give you the minimum what you're putting in. And if you happen to be sitting in a screwed up way, not lined, and your mind is thinking about something else, you're likely to make more mistakes.
So,
and Ted?
I think what's going on here has to do with two basic paradigms of what word processing sorts of document systems were like. The ones of the 60s that were script editor-oriented kinds of things had embedded control commands in these things in the same sort of way that you've embedded in the document to demarcate certain things that are there. And what WYSIWYG has now done, and probably why you're seeing this for the first time in 23 or 24 years, is that that paradigm has become so inherited that it's impossible to even conceive of the fact that there were structured documents done this way before we kind of just spilled this stuff onto the screen, onto a file, and said what you see there is what you get. And so, I mean, the only reason I could even make a link here is because I remember those editors and remember what I had to do in order to mark the boundaries of that so that that text could end up being displayed in a way I would like to. And, you know, to move between those two domains, I think, is a rough conceptual shift for people who've been working in this other world for probably 3 or 4 years or longer.
Okay, then what I'd like to do is saying, accept it takes a shift, and that if you find a way where it clearly identifies to the computer that this is the stuff that's going to be attached to this node, and this to this node, and so on, the advantage you get in here by being able to operate on them as discrete entities is very large. And you know you could get conventions in your file in which the computer could interpret that in some way and do some of that too. But there's a real advantage. And as we move to object-oriented environments, it's the kind of thing you can capitalize on. So advantage A is when if you take the extra time to say what class of object, then the selection of it is very much more complete. You look up and see what class you designated, and you look down at the mark, and there's no question in your mind that you've not unmarked it. The time it takes to go mark out a block accurately compared to this is very large. The fact that whole chapters or sections get moved just as easily as a given paragraph. The fact that if you look at a structure, and you can just transpose 2 paragraphs, just 2 chapters just as fast as that, and see what's happening. So that you can copy a branch, delete a branch, move a branch, just as easy as you can copy a word, delete a word, move a word. And those are it just turns out to be very powerful in giving you a vocabulary to operate. So the value of it from that point of view, I'd really be reluctant to give up. And then it has a lot of other ones, the fact that you can give it those names, and you can have properties under it that are very distinct, and you know what they're tied to. And, so that's part of, there's a whole bundle of different things that are built into this that don't exist, at least in one bundle like that anyplace else. And the kind of statement that we're making is there's a lot of value in operating inside a coherent environment like this, and the power out there, that people, if we talk a little bit about the history of its application, the people that would give away their children to be able to get this in a modern environment where it's this kind of comprehensiveness in those big project areas, because the power of it is just the people with forefront kinds of super Sun, Hewlett-Packard, Macintosh stuff kind of technology would come in and say, well, we can do that too. But their interpretation of it was just something totally inadequate for doing what it is. So I just say, all right, the lessons we learned, we're trying to find a way to communicate those to the world and get a chance in pilot environments for the general pursuit of learning how to go after really comprehensive kind of collective work with heavy knowledge work, things like this. So it's a big thing. So one thing I might point out is Dean Meyer, who's Dave Gardner's boss, they started to use a miniature version of Augment that ran on the PC. They call it Minibase for all their office work. And then they decided they'd really like to go after the whole Augment. So Dean worked for us for many years, and so he's had Dave plugging away. So tomorrow morning, he's going to demonstrate in the next room under Windows what it is. So he says, all right, I can do probably not much I've done so far. You can't, and we didn't get to the mail or the journal, which we better go do. Some larger systems. Anyway. But it's a real education for me to hear these questions and to realize that I talk generally about the paradigm and then bump into a difference in paradigms and have a hard time finding out where the boundary is, what's the problem. But it's... Did you have another question?
Well, I was just going to point out that the fact that there is a significant difference in what was called a different paradigm with respect to what we're normally used to with using word processors versus the statement approach and the other types of entities that you have defined in Augment. That's true, there is a significant difference there, but the reason I raised the question was not because of the inability to see that difference, but because of the recognition that with the hyperdocument type of an approach, the links and the usage of it is only as good as the author's creation, in the sense that that when he defines a statement and an address, it's only going to be useful to me if it's an entity that I can work with. In other words, if he defines the whole document as being a statement, it's not going to be very useful for me to, link to that document and want to pull the whole thing over. It's more useful if he's used keywords or he's used key entities that I can use later. My point being that there's a lot of discipline involved in authoring hypertext or hyperdocuments, and the questions that I have are one, will people take to that? Will they learn it? And your point is that's an issue, but there's a trade-off between the cost involved in people learning things quickly versus the long-term benefits of gaining that knowledge. So one issue is, will they learn it? And the second issue is it worth it?
Right.
And that's what I'm keep rolling over in my mind is
I gather there's a general answer, but a specific one is I think you've misinterpreted some of the definitions in here, I gather. But the other one is, whatever it is, the problem that there are many issues like that of going out in that frontier that's opening up. And the hypothesis is there are going to be lots of things where you get a lot of value it'll take a shift in paradigm, which is difficult to manage, both in the human system and the tool system utilization and learning side of things. And different in paradigm between the way the vendors ought to bring out their products and support them, etc. So the strategic question is, we have to face that. No matter if they're tough problems or not, we have to decide, are you going to settle for the easy way like that, and then what's likely to happen? Or are you going to try to find ways that are practical, etc., the best way possible to climb the hills in spite of the impediments? And that this is what the seminar is all about, is a strategy for going after it. And so a lot of these differences in paradigm here started out in 1960 when I say, hey, look, there's some qualitative differences in the human system, and there's some real vectors in that that are very likely to produce a lot of value. And that first one is a really different way to think about externalizing what's in our heads and using that. So let's go after a good first map of that. Well, it proved in the next 20 years to be extremely valuable. No, it was actually 25 or so. Very, very valuable in lots of applications, and a value that isn't generally recognized. So it's like one of those existing paradigms. Case and study. It gives you the best leg up, I know, to really go in and deal with the Kodiak issue and problem. So that's one item. Is Kodiak worth trying to get? Well, yes, because look at the strategic value if you get that and get moving. And among them being pulling together the kind of experience and knowledge into new kinds of handbooks that you can provide people that are doing the B, is how you can surmount those problems and such. So there's that interconnection of these different 6 modules of concept. So when you get to this hyperdocument system one, we say, hey, it's got new paradigms. And that's why I spent a lot of time the first day of talking about paradigms. Say, when you hit them, it's hard, etc. And it's going to be the single biggest problem. And so I wanted to show this stuff to say it's got examples in it that result from a shift in paradigm. Whether it's the best new paradigm to do or not is a secondary question. But there's very good evidence that it's a different paradigm, and B, it's proven very powerful out in the world. There isn't any other paradigm about this that any of the vendors has got that can equal it. So it says, well, that really bears looking at and not rejecting because it's different, and saying, well, tell me how your system's going to manage in this kind of global way and the continuity. So, like that. So if there are better candidates, put them into some pilots and start learning. And that's the way. And,
I want to take issues of responsibility and commitment about hypertext. Who should be in charge of hyperlinked portion of hypertext? The portion may disappear at any moment and modified as the creator want to modify it.
I think you're talking about it's the kind of thing that's dealt with or talked about as though it's a big problem. If you make a link into a document of mine, and I want to modify it or throw away the object that you pointed to, what's my responsibility about the existence of your link in that? And the only practical solution that I can see of is I don't have any responsibility, any major one, other than if you send me a letter that I inform you that I moved. See? So conventions and good treatment and stuff like that, maybe I do. There may be some classes or types of links that I would be more careful about if I knew about them pointed to me. But there's no way that the way that the problem can go out that's if I have to take, let's see, a very important part of the whole system is that an author has to have the ability to tie off a bundle of these things and representing what I'm going to publish this minute and talk. Publish it or transmit it to somebody, sign it off with, we got signature to something like that, so it's a legal signature with a kind of encryption way of doing it. Send it to him, and here's my RFP, and I'm going to stand behind that RFP. And so he's going to archive it, so he has a copy, and he can prove that I wrote it and signed it off that day. And a week or two later, he's sending back his proposal. That's a legal thing also. And they're both going to be citing a package of specifications or requirements or prior stuff like that. And so in any of those cases, those have to be stationary, legally obtainable documents you can prove are written. And there's no way you can go start updating those if they're pointing to something that goes away or something like that. There just isn't. And there isn't any practical way I can think of. So you just say, look, it's link owner beware. It's the only practical thing I can think of. And when people get in these arguments, I come and ask them, what's your picture of the environment? And if you make a picture like I just described, that's the way it's going to be out there, that these have to be legally movable documents. You're not going to use a separate kind of a system for those legal transactions, or even the important ones within a project group, in which somebody says, hey, give me your milestones tomorrow, or here are the memo I wrote out objecting to something. Those things have to go in the project file and be anchored and stay. And so you can't go back and revisit what that author wrote at that time without causing too much problems. So anyway, you have to get your discussion of these things in the same usage paradigm environment. And the kind of one I look at it says, look, if you're making a hypertext system that's a reference thing and getting to me in a CD-ROM or something, and you've got all these linked around for me to study, and if I'm using that in my project as a reference, so I go in there and find out it's a catalog, and I come out and I talk about, I want to be able to make a link here that points into that, right? Or copy some of that out and do something with it. And if somebody comes and reads this and sees my link and goes into there, they don't want to find a really different way in which they move around and study in that environment. So that CD-ROM catalog has to be made with conventions and stuff which are interoperable with the rest of the way I work, or it's a real mess. So this is a problem about paradigm that the research exploratory community on hypertext isn't really making that picture. And what it reminds me of is back in the really long ago days, in the 50s, when people were talking about building computers, and all kinds of people were coming along with great ideas about how they could make faster adders or new technology, make digital, and they'd set up something on a bench and they'd claim they've got this really super new adder, and you come and look at the technology and say, but it won't work in a whole computer. You couldn't interconnect it. You couldn't maintain it because there wouldn't be anybody to know that technology and the way the multiplier works and all of that. So that this is the way I feel that people are doing now. They're not looking at the whole environment that these things are going to be operative in. And that environment's going to set requirements that will sort of obviate some of the directions people are pursuing now. So this is part of this thing, is saying what that environment's going to be like isn't, I'm not going to dictate it or something, but I know already that there are a lot of things required that's got to do. So the real strategic issue is what's the practical way to start learning what those environmental requirements are going to be and how you move to them and how you harness it. And you can't do it dry labbing, as I said before. I'll get off my horse and let you talk, Sam.
One question is, because of the comprehensiveness of the documents and the materials that you're dealing with in this environment, one way for me to think about what you're proposing is really a way for operating system vendors to think about replacing their file systems. That seems to me that's who you've got to kind of convince in some way, but that opens up another whole can of worms, about how you can convince somebody to go and take this direction, while at the same time there's really going to be a lot of resistance.
Right. So the question of exploring that frontier and saying, boy, if there's a configuration that gives a lot of altitude or is a very rich ore or something like that that's really, really rich, then the kind of people that have the biggest stakes in that better start finding that out so that they can try to say, hey, let's change the direction. That's what I'm just saying is My intuition started out saying there were tremendous values in that domain. So the experience we've gotten so far is saying that there's a lot more value there than the rest of the world seems to appreciate, and it has so much strategic value to start deploying it. So let's go. And along the way, a better strategic approach to start finding out how you affect the trends. So they are big issues, and you know, I don't know what more to say on that. They're big issues. Who's responsible to deal with those issues? You look out in the current marketplace, who would you say is responsible? Oh yeah, a certain billionaire. Yeah, he could make a big difference. And basically, I come around to saying that the vendors of information systems themselves aren't responsible sort of in today's work. It's not their responsibility. And the proactive approach of the user organizations and vendors who want to participate is the only thing I can see that can start exploring that frontier effectively. And so that's why I preach and give seminars and such, as saying it's really important. But if you can't handle that big an issue, it's like there are a lot of strategic issues that are large ones within any major organization that you can still apply a lot of the same strategic issues in there. But I'm just dead sure that it wouldn't be very long in getting any one organization with a more effective C activity moving along. It wouldn't be very long before that C activity would really realize I need to make liaisons, reaching out to other Cs and say, you know, we really need, there's a lot of value in making liaison. So that's what I'm sure of. So when you come back at 3:30, we'll see if we can require